So let's revise. Let's remind ourselves. And we're actually going to go, tonight we're going to go right back to the beginning. The first phrase and halacha in the Mishnah. Till when is Shacharis? We saw the Rosh, spoke about from when is Shacharis, but we are going to discuss till when is Shacharis. So there's two opinions. The Tanna Kama says till Chatzos. Rabbi Yehuda says ad daled shois. And perhaps surprisingly, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, not like the Chachamim. And the reason for that will become clear when we get to Daf Chav Zayin. It'll get a little bit clearer. But this is really where what we're going to focus on tonight. We're going to try and understand the following. I'll lay it out for you to start with, so we know exactly where we're going. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, which means that Shacharis finishes at Daled Shois. And yet, we also paskin that if you didn't manage to daven until Daled Shois, you can daven until Chatzos. And the question is, make up your mind. Either Shacharis finishes at Daled Shois, whatever the reason is that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, now that should tell me that once Daled Shois is gone, it's gone. I mean, we don't have this, drinking in the last chance saloon, to use the Western metaphor, spaghetti Westerns, that Shema finishes this time. But if you didn't manage, you got another hour to say it. There's no such thing. What on earth is this? So in order to understand this, and we're going to go through the main shittas of the Rishonim and some very interesting lomdus in this, we're going to quickly go over the Gemara again. Yeah, is that all right? Quickly. So the first piece of Gemara, which we'll do anyway, just a quick chazara, was an unrelated question. Veraminu, frag die Gemara, ein Widerspruch. Mitzvos im anei zachamok, die schieß mich gule litfila, v'nim zum ispalil bayoim. That Shacharis is done at sunrise. So, why and how can the Mishnah say that it's until Chatzos? That was the simple question of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, no, kitanya hila vasikin. There is an ideal, an optimal way to do Shacharis. That's called vasikin. The Alma Rabbi Yochanan vasikin hoya gomer neisei manei tzachamo. But v'kula alma, and that's it. That's vasikin. That's vasikin. But of course, in other words, there's the optimal time. And then there is, if you didn't do it in the ideal optimal time, how long do you have? And that's our Mishnah. So there's gar kind of chaga. Now we come to the piece that interests us. Okay? Let's focus. Are you telling me that you only have up until Chatzos? That's not true. Rabbi Yochanan taught, if a person made a mistake, he forgot, and this, by the way, this is a very important point, which we saw also at the bottom of the page, if you remember, the very last line where Rabbi Yochanan excluded from Tfilas Tashlumin. You can only play catch up and do Tfilas Tashlumin if it was a mistake. Something happened beyond your control. But if you were amazed, absichtlich, you did it consciously, then there's no catch up for you. So let's go back. Says Rabbi Yochanan, if for some reason a mistake happened, whatever, not your fault, and you made a mistake and you didn't daven Ma'ariv, it's okay, you can daven Shacharis twice. Shacharis, if you forgot to daven Shacharis, mispalel b'mincha shtayim. You can daven twice for mincha. So this is the Gemara's question. How can the Mishnah tell me that the last time to daven Shacharis is either Daled Shois or Chatzos? It's not true. Rabbi Yochanan teaches you have an opportunity to do it later with mincha. That's the question. Answers the Gemara. The answer is as follows. Kula, the truth is, Kuli Yomi Matzli Va'ozil. Really, you could go on davening all day. Now, this is a very important phrase, and we're going to we'll come back to this. Kuli Yoima Matzli Va'ozil. Really, one could daven all day. So then what's our Mishnah about? If you can daven all day, then why do they say only until Chatzos or until Daled Shois? What does that mean? Says the Gemara the following. Ad Chatzos, yoha v'leischat tefillah bizmano. If you daven Shacharis before Chatzos, or presumably before Daled Shois, you get something special called the reward of, quote, tefillah bizmano. You're a good boy, you daven Shacharis in the right time, you get a gold star, right? But Mikan va'elech, from that moment on, you can still daven Shacharis. The Gemara, if we just take the Gemara at face value, it sounds like the Gemara is saying, you can daven all day. Shacharis is an all-day affair. But there is something called bismanoi, in the right time, which itself is quite contradictory. Make up your mind. Can you daven all day? Is it an all-day affair, or is there a right time? What does that mean? This is what we're going to dive into tonight. So there is something, there's tefillah bizmano, tefillah in the right time, and that is either up until 4 hours or chatzos. And then there is something called, I don't know, you get tzcha tefillah, but not tzcha tefillah bizmano. Now, the Gemara asked from Tashlumin, right? Tashlumin is the word we use for the concept of playing catch-up. It's a whole simon in Shulchan Aruch, Erechaim, simon Kuf Ches. Yeah? So the Gemara asked a question from Tashlumin, and the Gemara's answer was, what was the Gemara's answer? Well, that's really a shaila. What is the Gemara's answer? And as we're going to see, it's a bit of a question. Where does that leave us now? And especially, and this now we go over to the sheet, because this plays itself out in halacha lemaisa, in practical halacha. Why? Because we paskin, the Shulchan Aruch and most Rishonim paskin, like Rabbi Yehuda, right? So Shacharis, the time for Shacharis finishes at 4 hours, and yet they paskin that b'di eved you can daven until Chatzos. And the question is, what on earth does that mean? Okay, you ready? Let's dive into it. So the first source that we have over here is the Mishnah. Tfilas Hashachat Chatzos, Rabbi Yehuda says at Abba Shois. We have a brisa which we have not yet learnt, but let's do it quickly. You with me? Mipnei ma omru Tfilas Hashachar ad Chatzos, says the Gemara on Amud Beis, which we'll get to. Why do they say that Shachar is until Chatzos? Shahari Tomid Shel Shachar Korev V'hoilech ad Chatzos. Because what the sugya we're going to get to on Amud Beis is what actually is the basis for davening. And here are the two opinions. I'll just put them at a very basic level for tonight. Is it Tfilas Ovois Tiknum? Avram instituted Shacharis, Yitzchak, Mincha, Yaakov, Mariv. Or, alternatively, it is based on the Korbanos, the Tomid. So the Korban of the morning, the Tomid of the morning, is brought until Chatzos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ad arba shois, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that the korban tomid of the shachar is only brought until 4 hours. In other words, our Mishnah, says the Gemara, is not actually a machlokas about tefillah at all. It is really a machlokas about korbanos, the tomid shachar. There is a machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. Until when can you bring the korban tomid shel shachar? The Tanna Kama, Chachomim say you can bring the korban until Chatzos, and Rabbi Yehuda says until Arba Shois. And that plays itself out now in our Mishnah with Shacharis, because we are going along with the opinion that the times of the Tfilas is based on the halachas, the times for the korban. So far, so good? Yeah?
That would be the obvious answer to that. The Tfilos are based on the korbanos. There would be a strong argument for
that's what the Gemara seems to say, but that doesn't answer it at all, because if we paskin that it's until 4 hours, then we shouldn't be able to still daven until Chatzos. That's the problem. So you haven't got around that problem.
We have the same problem with the Tomid then, right?
No. So there are two opinions as to until when you can bring the korban Tomid.
Oh, okay.
But we take sides. We have to pick. We pick. So we paskin. You'll see. It'll play itself out in two minutes. You'll see.
Okay.
Then there's the last quote here, is a Gemara in and Chav Zayin Amud Aleph in a daf's time. Omer Rabbi Chizda halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Hoyel utnan bibechirta kavosei. Now, what's bechirta is the way that Chazal referred to this Masechet idios, which idios means the best. So bechirta, that's the way the Gemara refers to it. So because the Mishnah in idios follows Rabbi Yehuda, therefore we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. And of course the Gemara feels the need to explain, because normally we follow with Chachamim, the majority. So this is an exception, but this is the reason. So therefore, we now have, so look at here, the core dilemma. Since prayer times are modeled directly after the daily morning sacrifice, the Tomid Shel Shachar, so once 4 hours have passed according to Rabbi Yehuda, Ovar Zmanoi Bottle Karbonoi. Remember that? The time has gone. The carbon is... So why then did Chazal allow prayers to continue until Chatzos? That is the first problem we have to deal with. And with this, we go to one of the later Achronim, actually, the Shacharis of Teshuvos Mishkanos Yaakov. And the Mishkanos Yaakov says as follows, over on page 2. Shacharis of Teshuvos Mishkanos Yaakov, Sof Simon Pei. He says as follows: Da'af Rabbi Yehuda moide dizman tomid min ha'toira hu ad chatzos. He brings, again, I'm quoting a little piece from a long tshuva, and he brings proofs to this, but this is his thesis. He says as follows: even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that the time for the korban tomid min ha'toira, you can actually bring it up until chatzos. V'rak midrabanon omru ad daled shois. It was only that midrabanon, they limited the time for the korban. And therefore, b'di eved, let's say there was a delay of some sort, and they hadn't yet brought the korban tomid, u'b'di eved afa tomid kosher ad chatzos. So the korban tomid, b'di eved, was also kosher until chatzos, right? Therefore, says the Mishkanos Yaakov, that would explain our attitude as well. Shacharis lechatchila should be before Dalet Shois, but b'di eved, we will model it on the korban tomid, which b'di'eved is min ha'torah, is actually kosher. You can bring the korban tomid until midday. So b'di'eved, if you didn't manage to daven shacharis, you can still daven, and that would explain the halacha, which is a very neat explanation. Interestingly, the Rishonim don't mention this. Now we're going to dive into the Rif, the Rambam, the Rosh, and the Ra'avan, and we'll discover something fascinating. So, the Rif says as follows, and this is what, when you learn Rishonim, when we learn the earlier commentators, they write their words, they use their words very, very carefully, so they have to be learnt with precision. Says the Rif, here's the quote: Va'af al gav de leisa liderabonon de omri ad chatzos. I'll translate: even though de leisa liderabonon, we do not follow the first opinion of the Chachomim in the Mishnah, who say that it is until chatzos. However, if somebody made a mistake and he davened after 4 hours, schar tefillah yahavulei, schar tefillah bizmano lo yahavulei. Says the Rif, he adds a few words. Says the Rif, even though we pasken like Rabbi Yehuda that it is until 4 hours, but when somebody made a mistake and davened after 4 hours, he will still get some sechar for tefillah, but not tefillah bizmano. That is what the Rif says. He doesn't give us any more explanation. It's a little bit cryptic, because what we're trying to do with this style of learning is always trying to understand what's really going on. Like law, what is the principle upon which the ratio decidendi, or whatever you call it, what is it based on? What is going on? Yeah. So the Rif, but he tells us something interesting. I don't know whether you picked up on something. I'm going to keep quiet, and we're going to read the Rambam now, and we'll see that there is possibly a difference. Let's see if you can pick up the difference. Let me read and translate the Rambam. The Rambam paskins as follows: Uzmano ad soif sha'or revi'is. The time for Shacharis is until the end of the 4th hour, shehi shlishis hayom, which is a third of the day. Ve'im ovar oita'a, and if you transgressed or you made a mistake, ve'hispalel achar arba ad chatzos hayom, and you davened after 4 hours, in between 4 hours and chatzos, yotza yidei chayvas tefillah, you have fulfilled the obligation of davening Shacharis, avalo yotza yidei chayvas tefillah bizmana. But you have not, paraphrased from the Gemara, yes, you haven't done the obligation of tefillah in the right time. Shekeshem shet tefillah, he adds. Shekeshem shet tefillah mitzvah min ha-Torah. Just like tefillah is a mitzvah min ha-Torah, kach mitzvah midivreim leispalel oisa bizmano. You see, this is the Rambam in line with his own opinion. The Rambam is of the opinion that one tefillah per day is min ha-Torah. The Ramban argues, but the Rambam is of the opinion that one tefillah every day is min ha-Torah. And the Rambam says as follows: Shekeshem shet tefillah mitzvah min ha-Torah. In the same way that tefillah is a mitzvah midoraisa, kach mitzvah midivreim lispalel oisa bizmano. There is also an drabonon element within it to daven at the right time, k'meshetiknu lanu chachomim u'neviim, like the chachomim explained it to us. What? Without looking in the notes, can you see the difference? Don't cheat. Can you see the difference between the Rif and the Rambam?
Rif is talking about schar, Rambam is not talking about schar. Not obligation.
Okay, yeah, okay. That's not what I meant, but it's an interesting point. Okay, much more fundamental than that.
I think he said if you missed it by accident.
Oh, well done. Very good. Excellent. So the Rif and the Rosh and the Ra'avan limit it, they restrict it. Look at the word here. Heicha de to'i in the Rif. That's what Eric picked up, quite right. Heicha de to'i. So the Rif and the Rosh and the Ra'avan say that if you made a mistake and you davened too late, then you're okay. What's the clear implication in the Rif of the Rosh and the Ra'avan? That you only have this luxury of davening between 4 hours and chatzos only if it was a genuine mistake. But if you did it b'mezid, your goose is cooked, as we say. Nothing doing. Okay? Whereas the Rambam, what was the Lashon Rambam? V'im ovar oita'a. Ovar means deliberately, absichtlich, im ovar oita'a. He widens it. So the first thing we have is a massive, incredible machlokes rishonim in our Mishnah. We pasken, as we're going to see later in the Gemara, we pasken like Rabbi Yehuda. It was also paskened in Shulchan Aruch that b'di'eved you can daven between 4 hours and chatzos. The question is, when can you do that? Big machlokes. The Rif and the Rosh say only if you did it by mistake. The Rambam says even if you did it b'mezid. Now, why is this? Yes?
Couldn't we also interpret that over would be also an honest and ta would be just a genuine mistake?
Ovar is Aveira. It's always, in Lashon Chazal, it's always...
I mean, it's literally pressed, right?
No. Aveira means he was Ovar. Ta'ah takes into account all forms of mistake, right? Ovar means he did it davka. Very clear. There's no other way you could really read it.
So ta is also honest.
Sorry?
Honest also ta would be...
So that's right, so it would be included. Kal v'chomer, if already ta'ah, then kal v'chomer onus, of course. Onus is greater than ta'ah. Yeah, ta'ah means I made a bit of a mistake. Onus is force majeure. It's something that's way beyond my control. So it's kal v'chomer, you wouldn't need to see that. But anyway, in Lashon of Chazal and in Lashon of Rambam, that's what Ovar means. Now, how is this machlok is going to play itself out? And here we come to a beautiful piece of lomdus. And this lomdus is to be found in none other than the Beis Yosef. We don't need to go to the Chazon Ish or the Steipler or one of the Reb Chaim Brisker for this piece of lomdus. This piece of lomdus, this question, this analysis, is to be found in the writings of the Beis Yosef. Now he quotes himself. Here's model 1. Okay? Here's model 1. So the Beis Yosef in Simon Peites, which is where it is in Hilchos Tefillah, quotes himself because he wrote a number of works. The Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote, well, he has Tshuvos, Responsa, which is called Avkas Roichel. He wrote a big perush on the Rambam, a commentary on the Rambam called the Kesef Mishnah. He wrote the Beis Yosef. He then wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and he wrote other things as well. He actually has, but I don't, not for now. So he quotes himself, Kesef Mishnah, quote, V'nire li hata'am. And it appears to me that the reason is, Dekiv and dekaimelon ta'ov le'ispalel Shacharis, mispalel min choshtayim, v'yoytze yedei choivas Shacharis. He says as follows, beautiful, gorgeous svara, beautiful. He says it's very simple. Rabbi Yochanan teaches us that if you miss Shacharis altogether, you can play catch up in the afternoon. And look at his language. V'yoytze yedei choivas Shacharis. By davening mincha twice, you have fulfilled your obligation of Shacharis. There is this concept, Tashlumin, Rabbi Yochanan teaches us. He says, well, if you can be Yotze Shacharis in the time of Mincha, Kol Shekein Ad Chatzos, all the more so, it's obvious that you can fulfill your obligation of Shacharis before the time of Mincha has even started. It's just logical, beautiful, simple. Again, he says, what's going on? Why should you be able to daven Shacharis after 4 hours if we pasken that the time for Shacharis really finishes at 4 hours? Says the Beis Yosef, it's very simple. I learn it from the next piece of Gemara. There is this concept of Tashlumin, that in a time when you cannot daven Shacharis, and you can only, it's because there's another tefillah's come along called Mincha in the afternoon, and you say, oh, I forgot to daven Shacharis. You can daven Mincha twice, and you're Yotze Shacharis. Well, if I can fulfill my obligation post facto with Shacharis in a time which is a time for Mincha, Kal v'chomer, all the more so I should be a fortiori. All the more so I can be Yotze Shacharis at a time when Mincha hasn't even started yet, in between 4 hours and Chatzos. That's his lashon. Now, so you know what this tells me? This tells me now that the Beis Yosef in this approach, how does it work? Up until 4 hours is the time to daven Shacharis. So up until 4 hours that's the time of Shacharis. What happens if you daven between 4 hours and Chatzos? What is it? Can you categorize it for me?
I think he said
Go on.
that it's lo bazmanim.
Right. Can we give it another definition? Another. It's Tashlumin.
Oh.
That's what it is. It's a tefillah. It's Tashlumin.
But wouldn't that mean that you could pray mincha before chatzot?
Why mincha? No, you're doing Shacharis.
So that's
Just
also called
Shacharis.
Tashlumin.
Just Shacharis. No, I know what Eric's asking a good question. Where do we find a? You're getting into some good lumders, because normally when we do a Tashlumin, there's always two tefillahs side by side. Is that what's bothering you? That was what was bothering you. Very good. Now so again, there are two different ways of understanding why there need to be two tefillahs side by side. There are two ways of analyzing that, and depending on how you analyze that, this one would make sense. But let's assume for the moment, one way of looking at it is, it's not, buy one get one free. Yeah, it's just it's the time of Mincha, and I need to do catch up for Shacharis. But you can't do catch up for Shacharis before you do the one that you're meant to be doing now. So you just got to get that one out of the way, so to speak. It's the current obligation. You've got to do the current obligation before a prior obligation. And if you just look at, and that's one way of looking at it. Yeah? Now, if you look at it like that, well, at the moment I don't have any other obligation. I only have Shacharis. I'll say Shacharis. But it's clearly a Tashlumin. And the proof is that when he's trying to work out and he's trying to explain why you can daven Shacharis in between 4 hours and Chatzos, what does he use? He uses Tashlumin. He says, if I can daven a Shacharis in the wrong time, even in the time when there's another tefillah I should be davening, then all the more so I can daven a Shacharis when there's no other tefillah to get in the way. So how is he categorizing it? He's very clearly categorizing it as a tefillah's Tashlumin. But then he has a problem. He then has a problem as follows. He says, Umikol mokom, yesh medaktekim shahoy lo l'rifu l'rabbeinu lichtov ad chatzos v'chatzi sha'o yoser. So why does the Rif and the base and the Tur say that you can daven Shacharis up until midday, but not as soon as it comes to midday, you're finished. Why? Mincha doesn't start until half an hour after midday. So what happened to that half an hour? And that would seem to indicate that it's not a Tashlumin thing. Because if it is a Tashlumin thing, then you should be able to do it on its own up until the time Mincha starts. But the fact that it cuts off at midday would seem to indicate that it's something else. And because of that, he rejects this pshat, and we're going to come to another case. Furthermore, he's going to give us another analysis. So this was the first approach of the Beis Yosef. So his first attempt at understanding the lomdus of why you can daven between 4 hours and chatzos is that it's basically a tashlumin. See if you can ask me a question. When are you allowed to daven tashlumin? In what case? In what circumstance?
Shogeg.
Only b'shogeg. So it's definitely not going to work with the Rambam. Because if it's a tashlumin, the Rambam said even in ovar, so it can't be a tashlumin. So there's another question, there's another problem. So there are two reasons, we now have two reasons why this model, this analysis of the Beis Yosef is not so great. Number one, because if it's a tashlumin, then you should be able to do it on its own up until the next tefillah kicks in, which is half an hour after chatzos, not cut off at chatzos, problem number one. And if it's a tashlumin, then it should be limited to the circumstances when you can do tashlumin, which is only if you were a shogeg, if it was a mistake. But the Rambam, although we saw that the Rif says it's true, but the Rambam and the Tur also, and he's commenting on the Tur says, even if you did it on purpose. Now, if you're doing it on purpose and you're allowed to daven, then it can't be tashlumin, because that's not how tashlumin works. So he rejects this pshat, and he over the page, and we now have a new pshat. Okay? Second pshat. Says the Beis Yosef, for those two reasons, page 3. So for those reasons, he rejects that model. Yeah, you with us? Mm-hmm. And now he tries it again. Says the Beis Yosef, V'loi. So he says as follows. I'll give it to you outside first. It's very simple. He says, you know, we have a concept generally when we're learning. We try to minimize machlokas, meaning the scope and the parameter of two opinions. We'd much rather say that the scope of the argument is not huge. We try and minimize the scope and the parameter. And therefore, he says, if we take the Mishnah at face value, then it's very strange, he says, because then you would have the following analysis. You would have that the Chachomim hold you can daven Shacharis up until Chatzos, and Rabbi Yehuda says only up until 4 hours, and then you're done, finished. Which means there's a whole gap in which you're absolutely stuck. That's a big machlokas. And he doesn't like that. He says, therefore, he would prefer to say the following. It's not so logical to assume that there's such a big... Are you with me? Top of page 3. It says 3 pages at the bottom. Right. I put the pages at the bottom. Yeah. You got it? Okay. You got it now? Yeah. It's not plausible, to make such a big machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon. Loimar, to say, shel Rabbanon. I didn't even say it well. According to the Rabbanon, you can daven lechatchila up until chatzos. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, not even b'di'evet. According to the Chachomim, you can daven ideally all the way up until chatzos. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't daven between 4 hours and chatzos, not even b'di'evet. That's too much of a gap. So he says as follows. Elo mistaber, shegam leRabbi Yehuda ad chatzos yochel lehispalel b'di'evet. And this is very similar to what we saw in the Mishkanos Yaakov, right? That he says that Rabbi Yehuda is saying the following. Rabbi Yehuda says lechatchila. Rabbi Yehuda says there are two time frames to Tfilas Shacharis, like we sometimes have with other halachas. Lechatchila, until 4 hours. B'diavad, not great, but you can still daven. It is still a zman of Tfilas Shacharis. It's not great. It's whatever the reason is, whether it's because of the korban, whether it's not great, but it's still the zman of Tfilas Shacharis. The only difference now between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon is the Rabbanon say lechatchila, you can daven up until chatzos. In other words, they both agree when Shacharis finishes. There's no argument really when Shacharis finishes. The only question is, how are we going to add another layer and be a bit strict and say lechatchila, ideally daven until 4 hours, but di'eved, you can daven until chatzos, or do we say no? The Rabbanon say lechatchila, you can daven all up until chatzos. So that's how he understands the argument. Therefore, schar tefillah you would get, we understand, but you still get schar of tefillah, but not tefillah bismano. And now we've resolved the two problems which forced him to reject the first model. Why did he reject the first interpretation? That it's Tashlumin, because if it's Tashlumin, it should only be b'shoigeg and not b'mezid. Furthermore, if it's Tashlumin, you should be able to do it up until half an hour after Chatzos. What's this Chatzos cut off? And with this, he's resolved both of them. He says it has nothing to do with Tashlumin. This is Shacharis, my friends. This is Shacharis. Shacharis goes up until Chatzos. Everybody agrees Shacharis is Chatzos. Not a minute later. Half an hour. Chatzos, Shacharis finishes at Chatzos. The only question is, Rabbi Yehuda is machmir. You look tired. No, you're good? You're just focusing. Rabbi Yehuda, and I've also got my reading glass on, so I can't see you properly anyway. Rabbi Yehuda is machmir lechatchila to daven before arba shois. But of course he agrees, if you didn't, even if it was b'mezid, makes no difference. Because the difference between shoigeg and mezid is only a factor when we're talking about tashlumin. But if it isn't tashlumin, doesn't matter why you didn't, even if you're the biggest Rasha, and you davka didn't, and you went and did tshuva, it's irrelevant, who cares? So now we have, says the Beis Yosef, this is the approach that he takes. Okay? So we had one possible way of understanding it, now we have, this is his, and therefore, model B, as it called it. So Rabbi Yehuda agrees the morning window retains residual validity. It is boiker until midday, and it functions as an authentic b'diavad prayer time. It terminates strictly at chatzos, and this is true even if it was done intentionally as a mezid. That is the Beis Yosef. That is approach number 2. So far, so good?
Yes.
Good. Okay, now let's have a look at the Rashba. Comes along the Rashba, and the Rashba says as follows: Mihu davka bizman tefillah. Says the Rashba. Here's a question for you. Let's take this a bit further now. Let's go along with this Beis Yosef. Let me ask you a question, halacha l'maisa. Once Chatzos has passed, Shacharis is gone. Can I do tefillas tashlumin of Shacharis in this half an hour? Tashlumin, not Shacharis. Shacharis is gone. Can I do Tashlumin for Shacharis if the time for Mincha has not yet arrived? Or do I have to wait for Mincha for some reason, the Zman of Mincha? That is the question the Rashba addresses. Okay? Let's have a look. Yeah? Let's have a look.
How would be?
Sorry?
The Shulchan Aruch says.
We're going to see. We're going to see.
Okay.
Okay, but where did he get it from? He got it from the Rashba. Let's have a look. Okay. Says the Rashba. Mihu davka bizman tefillah. Says the Rashba very clearly. No, you may not do Tashlumin for Shacharis until the half hour has passed, and one could theoretically daven Mincha. That's what he says. Davka bizman tefillah. It has to be a zman tefillah. Now, I will say to you, and I'm going to gloss over it, there is a bit of a machlekes as to what is the exact point the Rashba is making. There's two possibilities, because he mentions two things, and the Achronim seem to focus primarily on one thing and not the other. Let's look at his language. Lefi shekiven shehu zman tefillah, v'hu oisek bitfilosoi, choizer umashlim mashata bitfilosov. He says, once the time for the next tefillah has arrived, and it is a zman tefillah, and I'm busy with the tefillah, then you can repeat, you can catch up for the other tefillah. And here the question, what exactly is the Rashba saying? Why is it important that it has to be the Zman Tefillah? So he says, interesting, he says a few words. He says it is the Zman Tefillah. Okay, is that a standalone point? Question. V'hu oisek bit filosai. And you're busy davening. I'm davening mincha. Once you're davening a mincha, you can daven another one. So there are some achronim who learn that, in fact, you must not make even a hefsek. It's actually a hefsek thing. Here's the thing. Let me put it to you this way. We take it we take it for granted. Have you ever tried getting a meeting with I don't know, Merz? Go and try and get a meeting with him. How likely do you think? Scholz, Merz, who's the guy nowadays? Who's the Chancellor, Bundeskanzler? Merz, ne? Merz. I challenge you, get an appointment with him 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. What's the likelihood? 0. No way. You've got gatekeeper upon gatekeeper upon gatekeeper. You'll never get there. 3 times a day, we take 3 steps back, 3 steps forward, and we have a private audience with the master of the universe. And we don't really stop to think about putting that into that context. That's what it is. And therefore, the right, so to speak, this is one way of analyzing it, to be able to daven another thing, I'll just daven another one. Who said you can? I mean, what is this? You're anyway davening something which is mandated. There's a mincha. I've got to do a mincha now anyway. And I have permission, an obligation. I'm doing a mincha. I'm there in front of him anyway. Well, I'm there and I have permission to be there. I will tarry a while. I'll stay a little bit longer and I'll do another one. And therefore it's without a hefsek. That's one way of looking at it. That's one approach to what the Rashba is saying. Let's see. He goes on and he says, Aval shaloi bizman tefillah loy. It has to be bizman tefillah. So one way of looking at it is like I said, the way I said about being a hefsek, that it goes literally together. Others say, no, that doesn't seem to be the main point. The point is it the zman of tefillah? You can't go and daven a tefillah which not in a zman tefillah. That's to be a zman tefillah. Right, it might be so therefore the dead zone, right, of half an hour between midday and 1/2 it's not a zman tefillah. You can't just all of a sudden rock up and start doing because it's not a shacharis. It's not, what is it? You can't start doing a tefillah in a half an hour of the day when it's a dead zone. There's no zman tefillah. Yeah?
So what about the kol yomu yotzivim?
Ooh, very good. Very good. So obviously we're not following that. You're quite right. We're obviously not following that. It's Mishnah asked a good question. We saw in the Gemara says I guess not. A good point. Good point. I have to think about it a bit. Okay. But one thing is for sure, it's definitely not, according to the Rashba. So your question is, you're asking, how does the Rashba, I'll tell you what the Rashba will say. The Rashba says, Kol Yoma means it's lav dafka. It's true, there is a half hour which you can't. But you've got the whole day, basically. But it has to be bizman tefillah. She'im loikein. Now he's going to, says the Rashba, I'll bring you a proof. Because if this is not so, Mai mispalel arvis shtayim umispalel mincha shtayim deka'omar. Rabbi Yochanan, when he teaches us about Tashlumin, what language does he use? He says you daven mariv twice or shacharis or mincha twice. That's his language. He should just say, if you don't need to be tied down to a zman tefillah, Rabbi Yochanan could have just said, Tov Eloi hispalel shacharis kodem chatzos. He could have just said, if you made a mistake, you didn't daven shacharis before chatzos, daven shacharis after chatzos. Why do you have to bring the mincha into it? Who cares? What's it got to do with it? So he says the point of mentioning mispal arvis time, shacharis time, mincha time is pointing out that you're doing it in a zman tefillah. That's the point. And therefore, if you can find a time which is not a zman tefillah, such as this half hour, then you can't daven. Inami, he says, or the Gemara should have said, Tov aloi hispalel mincha, chayzer umashlimo kol halayla. Should have just said you can go and do it all night. Why does that? When we talk about Tashlumin, we do it with the language that we use is always to mincha, to shacharis, to. Why mention that? Why is that even relevant? So he says because it has to be in a zman of tefillah. Okay, that is the opinion of the Rashba, and I'm just wondering whether we should squeeze in the next the Bach.
So the only difference would be this magical half hour
Yeah.
in the middle of the day, because
Basically.
the rest of the day you
Correct.
can try stuff.
Correct.
Can
Yeah.
I make a jump?
Sure.
If it's like Shabbat or another Yom Tov, could you do in that half an hour
We're going-
Musaf?
We will get to that. Very good. There is a piece which we're going to have to do. There are two tefillahs which are a little bit different, Musaf and Ne'ilah, which is discussed about for Tashlumin. It's challenging. It's technical. We're still on the ground level. We're not there. You're very advanced. We'll get there. I think we'll stop here for tonight. What have we done? Let's quickly review. What have we done? We have seen a machlokes between the Rif and the Rambam as to the catching up for Shacharis, whether you can do that if you made a mistake in between 4 hours and Chatzos. We're trying to understand this idea that you can daven in between 4 hours and Chatzos, even though we pasken that Shachar is only until 4 hours. Machlokes between the Rif and the Rambam, whether this refers also if you did it on purpose or not. The Beis Yosef tried two approaches. His first approach was that when you daven between 4 hours and Chatzos, it's actually a Tfilas Tashlumin. He rejected that for two reasons, because then it should only be if it was Shogeg, and it should also allow you to daven in the half hour after Chatzos, if it's Tashlumin. Then he says, so therefore it's not Tfilas Tashlumin. His final pshat is, actually it's just Shacharis. The argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanon is not so big. The only argument is whether in Lechatchila and B'di'evet, everybody agrees the Zman of Shacharis is until Chatzos. Lechatchila, Rabbi Yehuda says do it till 4 hours. What's the difference? Whether you get the schar of Tefillah Bismana or not. The difference now will be, says the Beis Yosef, that if you did not daven Shacharis before 4 hours, even if you were b'mezid, you could daven Shacharis until Chatzos, but you're not going to be able to do it. It's a Shacharis, and therefore the Zman of Chatzos is the cutoff, and the half an hour is not going to work. The Rashba, then we saw the Rashba, who says that Tashlumin always has to be in the time of a tefillah. So therefore it's not really connected to this Beis Yosef, because now the Beis Yosef is not saying it's Tashlumin. Okay? And that's where we're up to for tonight. To be continued. We're getting into it. There are 2 more opinions to learn as to how this works. Okay?